Okay, there you go.
Okay, we'll call the meeting to order. And we have remote participation. I see Tony and myself and Krista. And that's all for the remote participation, right?
I think that's okay for the committee level. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. I hope everybody was able to read to review the proposal for the budget for 2025. I actually on the first page. I know that Nelson and Louisa have just started with the bookmobile, but I think you need to change the percentages for Albemarle and Charlottesville.
You're talking about, so let's bring it up and we'll jump right into it.
Yeah.
You're ready, we're ready.
Okay.
So just as a bit of review for the newer trustees here, the first page that Alita refers to here is the page that internally we have always called the grid sheet. And it includes the overall allocations that we're requesting from each jurisdiction. So this is the sheet that kind of lays out what your particular jurisdiction is being asked to pay for next year and what categories it goes into. So at the top there are the regional costs, and these are split between all 5 jurisdictions, and it's done on a basis of how much material gets checked out, or the circulation numbers. It's a 3-year average there, so it changes every year. Those percentages are at the top. 60.7% of regional costs are Albemarle costs, 24.04 Charlottesville, 5.85 Greene, 5.87 Louisa, 4.33 Nelson. So there's 3 regional categories there. There's administration, which is my job, Jerry's job, Krista's job is just kind of the administrative core of the library system. Technical services, that is our ordering, cataloging, and processing of materials that goes out to all of our branches. And then 10% of reference services. This was part of the regional agreement where it's written out. The reference department for the central branch is the regional reference department. 10% of those costs are paid by all 5 jurisdictions. The rest of them are paid for as a central library cost. So you can see the total amount there, 2.1 million basically, and then here's the costs for each jurisdiction for those costs. And we'll get into the nitty-gritty of it.
So this is one of my questions.
Shoot.
On the next part of this sheet, where it talks about central board and north side, and it has these different percentages between Albemarle and Charlottesville. That's you get those percentages by circulation numbers.
Those are circulation numbers, and it's a 3-year average.
That's why they're all different.
Yes. Okay. So it's at that. So in this line, central, the 3-year average of the circulation of materials there is 57.41% Albemarle patrons, 42.59% Charlottesville, between Charlottesville and Albemarle using books. That's books going out. Yeah, being checked out.
And so the agreement is based, is it the allocation of funds is based on circulation?
The regional agreement has that spelled out. I mean, we don't have to do this right this second, but in the
so that's considered like basically the best measure of usage.
Yes, right? That's the measure of usage that has been agreed to by the 5 jurisdictions. So the section of the regional agreement, budget and cost for the regional library, lays out some things about timing, what the library system should be asking for, and then it goes into that whole thing. Regional costs should include all costs of providing regional reference, book purchasing, cataloging, automation, financial management, branch coordination, fiscal agent fees, fair market rental value of space. Unless otherwise agreed, regional reference service shall equal 10% of the cost of reference. Separate accounting shall be established and maintained for that purpose. And then it designates Charlottesville Albemarle shared costs. Those are the facilities in the Charlottesville kind of urban area. So it's Gordon, Central, and North Side. Those are split on that grid sheet by the 3-year, what Ann just pointed out, basically the 3-year circulation there. And then local costs are the rest of it, and those are borne entirely by each jurisdiction. So the Scottsville Library, for example, is a local cost for Albemarle County. The entirety of the funding for the Scottsville Library comes from Albemarle County. So we'll get into that as we go down there. But to your question, Peter, it is, for purposes of this agreement, the term circulation shall be defined as the total number of items checked out from any branch, library, bookmobile, or other point of circulation. Circulation percentage to be used for any fiscal year should be based on the figure for the previous 3 fiscal years. So it's all kind of laid out in the agreement that that's the measure that's used to decide how funding is going to be split.
And how does like a checking out ebook play into that?
It counts as in your monthly reports there when you look at circulation statistics. So for instance, here's last month's statistics here. And you look at the circulation by branch library for the year to date. The e-library portion there is anything checked out electronically, and it goes by library card for where the person's jurisdiction is.
So Albemarle will be credited if someone from Albemarle checks out an ebook.
Yes. Okay. And Charlottesville's credited, and that goes towards the overall circulation.
Okay. That's based on their address.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's based on where they live. These are good questions, especially if so many new trustees. So it's stop me if at any point I say something that sounds like I think it should make sense, but it doesn't. Okay.
Okay. So the bookmobile thing that I was referring to, that's based on the 3-year, right? I was thinking the ones at the top was the 3-year.
The ones at the top are the 3-year. The bookmobile is an agreement between Charlottesville and Albemarle, and what's reflected here, I believe, is only the Charlottesville-Albemarle cost. We're charging Louisa and Nelson separately for their share of bookmobile service. Basically, it's not a credit. I'm not sure. Oh no, it is here. I'm sorry. So we're charging them $6,200 each for a year's worth of service on 2 Fridays a month there.
Right.
So the 80-20 here is kind of the split between, how these, the numbers outside of that are split between Charlottesville and Albemarle.
Mm-hmm.
And that is by historical agreement between those 2 parties. Since this is the first full year that we're going to have this, it's just kind of tacked on there. But you're saying that it doesn't make sense to you and that needs
right.
to be
Because I was saying, wait a minute, that's 108% or something like that. I said,
it needs to be better explained here because it's not actually 80% of 163. It's 80% of these 2 numbers combined.
Okay.
All right. That's a good note. So we can actually, what we'll probably do is just remove that 80-20 split there, and just leave it as here are the costs for each jurisdiction. And when we talk to Albemarle and Charlottesville and Louisa and Nelson about it, we'll explain here's how those numbers are reached.
Okay.
I see Jerry curiously taking notes.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we'll just go down the row here. Central, the total cost $1.8 million for the building, and we'll get into each branch has its own individual sheet there. Let me write that down, Alita, before I forget.
Okay.
Gordon, the splits were almost 50-50, 49.29, 50.71. North side, it's usually about 80-20, so it's somewhere in that range. We're still seeing some impacts of kind of COVID use on these figures here, on these kind of jurisdictional splits and how things got checked out. It disrupted, the flow of books that we have been used to for many, many years, and we're starting to see that even out. So these will start to get, I think that the central numbers will climb closer to 50-50 as opposed to this Albemarle spike that we're still seeing there. North side will probably go up to closer to 80-20, 80 for the county, 20 for the city. Gordon's always about 50-50. So those are costs split between Charlottesville and Albemarle. And as I mentioned, the Scottsville costs are Albemarle only. The Crozet costs are Albemarle only. The Louisa branch costs are Louisa County only. The Nelson branch costs are Nelson County only, and Greene or Greene County only. Bookmobile we just discussed, but they had been traditionally split 80-20 between Charlottesville and Albemarle. So we kept that split for the core services and then added on the extra hours as a cost there. But that's a good point to clean that up a little bit so it makes more sense. The cost of JMRL pays for an employee librarian of our historical collection that works part-time in the Charlottesville Albemarle Historical Society, and that's split 50-50 between Charlottesville and Albemarle to pay for that position. That's what that next line is.
Mm-hmm.
Monticello Avenue Computer Lab, which is being transformed into a digital literacy lab, is at the Central Library, and it's split 50-50 between Charlottesville and Albemarle. So kind of the bottom line numbers here that we're going to be, if this is the budget that ends up being passed by the board that we'll be discussing with our jurisdictions, are at the bottom here. You can see, you know, what the current proposal is, what the current allocation for this fiscal year is, what the dollar amount of an increase is, and what the percentage of an increase is. So the overall total is about $369,000 over the current year's request, which is a 4.3% increase over last year, largely driven by the fact that this budget includes the raises that the Personnel Committee suggested, which are in two sets, basically. Either a 5% raise if you've been at JMRL for under 8 years, that includes 2% cost of living and a 3% raise, or a 7%, which includes a 2% cost of living and a 5% raise. That's for employees who have been with the organization for over 8 years.
But this does not include the medical insurance part, right?
Correct. This does include, you got a last minute copy of this yesterday that included the change in what JMRL is going to pay for the defined benefit retirement plan next year. We got that number yesterday.
Right.
And it actually saved some money based on our projections, which was good. We do not have the cost of what medical insurance will be. The way that that gets charged to us, JMRL pays the city of Charlottesville for access to that benefit, and we pay per individual employee a dollar amount. Likely that will go up over this current year's. This budget includes a static number. Probably we won't even have a full number by the time the board votes on this at the end of this month. So we will have to estimate. I think that the maximum it would go up would be 5%. So I might ask the board to pass a budget with a 5% increase in medical costs, and then we can always scale back on that if it turns out to be less. The total added cost there would be about $50,000. So this number 369 might potentially go up by $50,000.
Okay.
And those raises, again, those are across the board for all the branches.
Yes, that would be for all locations.
And so is the disparity in percentages of like Charlottesville's 3.5%, whereas Green's 6.6%, is that because of how the compensation changes played out?
It has a lot of factors in it. That's one of the factors that would drive that, you know, employees that have worked longer or you know, different changes in jobs there. But it also, it reflects the changes in the circulation percentages at the top there that we mentioned. So the changes over time, like it has weighted towards Albemarle the past few years. They have been paying more because of higher usage in the last few years. Can you all see this? We've got paper copies on hand here, but I don't.
Yeah, well, I've got a paper copy too.
Okay, good. Okay, so the next page of the budget is the overall proposed budget. So this is where all those numbers get broken down into the different categories. Largely, this is based on the categories that the software that JMRL uses, which is the SAP software. The city of Charlottesville has a license for. We get access to that. It's the categories that it breaks up our budget into. So when Jerry pays a bill, it comes out of one of these categories. It's either an office supply or most of them. The main difference between the bottom line here, the only difference, in fact, and the bottom line on the first page is that the second page includes state aid. So that's the money that JMRL is spending on books and materials. That first page, the grid sheet, is only what our local jurisdictions are paying for. This proposed budget sheet here, which is actually page 3 if you include the cover sheet, is the entirety of the money that we're expecting to spend next year. So it includes that state aid, which is in 2 categories. It's in books. It's about a hair under $1 million we're expecting to get next year in state aid. That could fluctuate. It depends on what the state does. It fluctuates depending on our population numbers as well. And then the other one is a $25,000 that we pull out of state aid in order to pay for supplies for technical services. That's things like the covering of the books and the barcodes and things like that. So that's the difference between the bottom line number here and the bottom line number on the grid sheet there. This is broken up into what we actually spent in fiscal year 23, which just ended in the end of June, what our budget for this current year has, and what's proposed for next year. The last column, this is a request from Albemarle County last year, is a percent change in these categories so that we can see, they can look pretty easily and see, well, where are the major fluctuations there.
Aren't we getting more in state aid?
Yeah, we got more this year. So if you see this, the 24 budget has over $1 million there, and the year before it was 910,000. Both of those are minus the $25,000 I just mentioned. The projections from the state are slightly lower for next year, but it's just a guess at this point. We won't know for sure until sometimes not. This year we didn't know until after July 1 what the total amount would be.
And then just to make sure I understand,
yeah, please.
From this point on, the next couple, 10 pages or whatever, break this down.
Yes.
Okay.
So these first two pages are summaries. Yes. First two pages are summaries. That grid sheet has what we're asking our localities to fund. This page has how all that's broken down in the actual expenditures. And then we go into each branch and department and say, here's what the costs are for that branch and department.
And like technical services is broken out separately.
Yes, there's a technical services page that we'll get to in the end here.
So, I mean, obviously, one of the things that jumps out on this page is this 100% increase in medical supplies. I mean, it's not that much money, but I was just curious.
Yeah. That's exactly the type of thing that our jurisdictional partners will look at. They'll see a number that looks out of whack and they'll ask, well, why are you paying twice as much for medical? So I'll let Jerry.
What are medical supplies?
Yeah, I'll let Jerry answer the details.
So a couple of years ago, you can see back in fiscal 23 actuals is just about what we've got budgeted for fiscal 25. We put in first aid kit supply boxes that primarily for staff at all the branches. So it was sort of hit or miss before. Branches would order on their own and they would run out of things, et cetera. These boxes get restocked monthly by the company. So there's never a shortage of Band-Aids, whatever people need.
I think if you look at that, so we spent $8,400 in 2023, the year that just ended, but we only budgeted $4,200 this year. I think this is a correction where we're saying, okay, we expect that we're actually going to spend closer to the $8,400.
Okay. So I mean, it wasn't a mistake, but sort of a mistake was the 24 budget.
We probably under budgeted.
Yeah, I think when the 24 budget was put together, it was so early. You don't have the experience of 23 to see what it was going to be. It was that new. Yeah. So.
But I'm glad to be able to provide this for staff, and it comes in very handy. They use more than you might think. Go ahead, Lindsay.
Something. These are incredibly thorough boxes. We're not talking about a little kit. We're talking about an enormous metal box on the wall that has everything you could need in it, except maybe you can do brain surgery. But you can.
Please don't. Yeah.
That's why we increased it.
It has everything, and the staff do use it.
Yeah.
So I have to say it's a wonderful service for staff.
Yeah, I think it's the right thing to have in a public building.
Yeah.
At this point, this probably also, there might be other costs that are in this line as well. Like, are the AED?
They are
costs?
Small part.
So we pay some of our branches. We have that defibrillator machines, and we have a contract with a company to come and monitor them and replace the batteries and things like that. So other costs there.
Now, if you're having a company to monitor them, would that be under contracted services, or would it just be part of the medical supplies?
We have it all budgeted under medical supplies.
Okay.
So I did have a question as I was glancing through this the other day with the safety supplies and the 2023 actuals. Did that get budgeted in and are considered as a medical supply now, or?
Yeah, it was about.
It's just such a small number.
$40. Right? I think
I was just curious for going forward of.
my guess is, so Jerry wasn't on board as our business manager last year during those expenditures. My guess was that something was credited to that probably we would normally credit to either cleaning supplies or, I'm sorry, medical supplies or cleaning supplies. We had a bunch of, during COVID, these lines all went up more than we were expecting because we were buying, initially gloves when we thought we might need gloves, and then masks to give out and things like that. So these costs have risen over the last few years. We could actually look that up and tell you what was bought with that $39.
I was just curious. And there's a few things where I noticed where it's in the actuals, but there's not a budget either currently or proposed.
Sometimes it's also
where that got moved to, and
sometimes also our jurisdictional partner, I mentioned this software is Charlottesville software, and they do maintenance on the Charlottesville area, the 2 branches in Charlottesville. So sometimes they will purchase something from the building and pull it from, they think that's the line it should be called for. So even though we don't have a budget for it, it's only there because there was an expenditure. We included every item here that had an expenditure just in the interest of transparency, so that everybody could see, like, here's what we spent the money on.
So like something like machinery and equipment, that was an expenditure this year, but there's no projection. Like it's
that's a big one, Jerry.
Yeah.
What do you know about machinery and equipment?
Could be something that wasn't foreseen in the equipment fund to be purchased, and a chair broke or table broke or something and just need to be replaced, and we would charge it there.
Generally, though, Peter, we when it comes to equipment, we buy that out of the equipment fund, which is not included in this budget. This committee will meet again very late in the fiscal year and review an equipment budget. By that same regional agreement, all equipment is purchased by revenues and fines and fees that the library gets. So like these tables, our computers and things like that are not funded by our local jurisdictional partners. Okay. But every once in a while we'll need to buy something, and here's where we come from the scenario. Same for that computer software non-capital there. So we've been talking, Jerry and I've been talking about the fact that we do have a fair amount of computer software that we have been paying for out of that equipment fund, that over time it should be moved into this operational budget, because it's not one-time software that we use for a project or something like that. It's ongoing operational needs. Like we use Google's Gmail and Docs and things like that, and we pay a fee for that every year. I think that initially was purchased out of the equipment fund, and it's not really equipment, it's an operational need at this point that we have email for staff. So eventually I'd like to see all those come into the operational budget, but right now some of them are still funded out of equipment in order to try to make this budget manageable for our jurisdictional partners. We don't want to throw things on there that they haven't been responsible for without talking to them about that. Okay, we could, I'm happy to answer any questions about what's here. We could go line by line here. The top 5 categories are all salaries and benefits there. And that reflects the changes that we've talked about in comp for next year. I'm trying to look at anything else that would stand out there.
What about rent? I mean, which buildings are we renting?
The big cost for rent is this building, is the Northside Library. So no, Albemarle County owns this building. JMRL owns no buildings, right? Albemarle County owns this building outright, and as part of that regional agreement, JMRL pays rent to Albemarle County on a monthly basis. It's tied to the increase annually is tied to the CPI, and it went up a tremendous amount this past year. One of the reasons that it's done that way is so that we can use it as a mechanism to charge Charlottesville for their 20%. It's kind of an 80-20% of the use of this building, basically. But it is the only branch that currently is charged that way. Now we pay a few other things in rent. We rent parking in front of both of the buildings on either side of the Northside Library, one for public use and one for staff use there, because the parking, when we moved from Albemarle Square, the parking wasn't quite big enough. We pay rent to Charlottesville and Albemarle for administrative space as well. That's a nominal figure basically, but that's written in the regional agreement there. So it's use of library space. Lindsay has thoughts. What else is an outlier?
And on the insurance lines, it's above the rent.
Yeah.
There's a decrease. Is that because we don't have those numbers, or are we expecting those to go down between 2024?
This one here, the insurance excluding workers' comp.
Yes.
So that's not for medical insurance. That's for the insurance that JMRL pays on. It's part of the board insurance that we get, you know, liability insurance, a general liability insurance. So we usually get a quote from our insurer, which is the Versa, Virginia Risk Sharing Association. It's a government, it's a Virginia state thing basically, and they cover our automobile insurance for the trucks and the drivers and things. They cover any liability for the, you know, something were to happen in a building, things like that. So
I just noticed there's the decrease there says.
But yeah, there's a decrease in the workman's comp also.
yeah, that's based on usage. You know, that's based on how often claims come in basically. So yeah, we could find ourselves in that. Is that right, Jerry?
Correct.
Yeah, so we could find ourselves either having that $7,000 left at the end of the year or having it all gone and needing more, depends on what happens during the year. So that's a best guess. Generally, not to speak for the business manager, but I think we look at kind of a 3-year average of expenditures, unless we know specifically a category or something's coming out that it needs to be increased. Generally, we're looking at what have the expenses been. I know that our jurisdictional partners appreciate this level of detail, even if they might not go through line by line. They're looking for those things that are sticking out, and they appreciate that everything that we spent is on here, so that there's no question about, well, where's our money going? It's all very well laid out for them.
What's included in local travel?
Staff travel to and fro locations,
Like
basically.
between branches and stuff?
Yeah, so everybody has a home branch that is their place of work, and they don't get paid for doing that. But if they needed to go to another branch for a meeting or for a training or something like that, there'd be a cost there. Anything else in local travel?
That's right.
Yeah. And that uses the IRS's mileage reimbursement, which has gone up quite a bit in the last few years as well. Other questions for these first two kind of summary pages, and we can always jump back to them. If not, we'll kind of quickly go through the branch pages. Each of those also has kind of a salaries and benefits section, and then the operating expenses. And you'll notice that the operating expenses are pretty small for most branches. You know, there aren't a lot of non-salary costs at each location there. So the bookmobile here, the increase in salary and benefits, 3.4%. Looks like projected increase in vehicle fuel. You know, we're kind of figuring it out this year with Louisa Nelson, how much more fuel is going to be needed there.
So and also the cost of the of the fuel is, you know,
it hasn't been going down. Yes. So I think we're projecting to need to spend more there next year. I'm going to kind of roll a little bit, so just stop if you see anything that sticks out. This is the librarian and the historical collection there that I mentioned earlier. There are no operational costs there. It's strictly salary for that one individual. Next page is the central library. This is one of the few places where there are a number of operational costs. So these are costs to run that building. The top is the salary and benefits, and then everything underneath that is operational. You can see the only change there is in utilities. Jerry mentioned this to me recently, that we have seen an increase in the cost of utilities for that building. So we're going to increase our request there, but also do a little bit of homework to see why that number has gone up. Everything else is
might be because of the age of the building, and you know, you get cracks in the replacement for windows that you know, your heating. Your heat might be escaping and stuff like that. Yeah.
Ann took the words out of my mouth. I was gonna say the working group likely can talk to Albemarle and Charlottesville about how every year the costs for maintaining that building are going up, and they're not likely to go down over time, unless we had a much more efficient, newly renovated building.
Yeah.
Okay, and then next up, these are just in alphabetical order. There's no particular order to these. So Pros A branch, salaries and benefits up at the top. And then no changes, or a slight decrease actually in the operational cost. And it looks like we're expecting a slightly smaller insurance cost for that building. But in general, you can see the types of things that are paid for at the branch. It's telephone charges, that local travel split out, some repairs and maintenance. It's good to have a little fund there in case JMRL needs to hire somebody. Generally, though, we'll work with our jurisdictional partners. If there's a building or a maintenance need, if it was at a Louisa County library, we would call Anderson at Louisa County and say, hey, we've got this issue, and they would either take care of it or they would put it into their capital. Down the road, we don't need a new roof. We've got a new roof, but we need a new whatever it might be, and they would work on it over time. If it's an emergency, though, sometimes at each branch we'll call a contractor to, hey, can you get out there and fix that? Because it needs to be fixed. Gordon Avenue Library, personnel costs at the top. Slight increase in utilities there. Same thing, that building not quite as old as Central, but we are seeing an increase in the city buildings and utility costs.
So David, overall, where we see a line item in actuals, but not in budget or proposed, I'm thinking $28 for small hand tools. That just means what?
Yeah, this is similar to the question that Brandy asked when we were looking at the main summary sheet. It means that there was an expenditure in that category in 2023, but that we hadn't budgeted anything to be expended in that year necessarily. It either is the city doing something there and they charged it to that line item in our budget, or it was just paid for out of a category that we didn't have a budget in. So for example, small hand tools, we don't have a budget for small hand tools. We would probably put that if we were buying it out of repairs and maintenance.
Right.
Exactly. But it might be that the city was performing a task there and they needed to buy a $25 thing and they charged it to that. Or it might have been that during the year last year, the business manager charged it to, when he was paying for it, he called it small hand tools instead of repairs and maintenance. So there was an expense there, but we're not anticipating needing a large budget or any budget for small hand tools.
Right. Okay, good. I mean, it's the old, they've got a line item for it. So somebody said, hey, that's a small hand tool. We'll put that in small hand tool. Yeah.
Yes, correct.
Thank you.
But we wanted to we included everything here let's give as much information as be as transparent as possible.
What's the reason for the retirement costs going down from 24 to 25?
I have to look specifically there. Usually when we see that, it's due to a retirement of somebody who was on the defined benefit plan, which costs more. And currently staff are only offered a defined contribution plan. So there used to be, JMRL had 2 retirement plans. Right now there's only 1. The older plan was more expensive and it was a pension plan of sorts. We still have plenty of employees on that, but newer employees aren't. So usually it's a retirement there where somebody left at the higher cost, but I don't.
So the cities gave the number yesterday, 50%.
Oh yes. Also the defined benefit plan costs went down yesterday. So that's exactly what this is. I can't think of anybody who retired there that was under the pension plan, but we do have staff there that are under that plan and it's cheaper this year than it was last year. It's significantly more expensive than the defined contribution organizationally. Does that answer that question? Yeah. Okay, Greene County, no changes on the operational end. Changes on the salaries and benefits, and you'll notice that this is a bigger one. This is 10.2%. It's because the Personnel Committee is recommending a change here, which is taking a 32-hour specialist position and turning it into a 40-hour librarian position. So the Personnel Committee is recommending that this budget includes that. Ultimately, it's up to the full board, but this committee can talk about whether or not to include that. The decision of the Personnel Committee was that since this is a Greene County only cost, we would take that to Greene County and offer it to them. Rather than removing it from the budget, we would give it to them and say, hey, here's what we expect this expense to be. One of the thoughts there is that Greene County's overall cost for participation in JMRL has been relatively static for the last 3 to 4 years. There have not been any big increases. So this is a need at the branch. They had somebody leave who was at 32 hours, that worked for their life and that's what they wanted, but they really need the extra full-time employee. Okay, library administration local. So this is the cost of administration. It's my job and Jerry's job and our courier service and the positions that are working for the entire regional system, and all the operational expenses here are shared regionally expenses. So things like office supplies. We don't have a budget for Scottsville to buy office supplies necessarily. We buy them regionally and then they get what they need from the shared resources there. So slight increase here. On the operational end, you can see a 2% increase there, slight decrease on the salaries and benefits end. Had some personnel changes. Here's where that medical supplies is called out, so, and if we were looking down the last row, that's going to stick out. It's the same number as on that summary page, but here's kind of where it gets split out on a smaller scale.
So all things like, that's another thing that's worth noting for the renovation issue. All those supply issues come to Central Library, yes, and then they get distributed, yes, from there. So you need to have that kind of storage facility and organizational, yes, options to handle it.
You need it to be managed and organized and distributed. And when Jerry came over here today, he had a dolly with a huge, I don't know what it was, but some piece of equipment that's coming to the Northside Library was brought over by.
It's for the brain surgery, but
and I cannot reiterate this enough. Please, no brain surgery.
What's the reason for the big drop off in telephone line charges?
Let's see. Oh, okay, yes. So JMRL gets federal funding for telco costs through the E-rate program, like schools do. So we apply for funding to get reimbursement, and it's a pretty significant reimbursement. I think it's around 80% of costs are paid for. So in the past, how that was handled was that money came in. JMRL paid an amount and then got a reimbursement for it. Moving forward, I think the way that it's handled is that the costs are deducted up front, basically. So we're only paying 80%. Is that correct?
Pretty much.
Do you want to clarify?
Sure. We basically get an annual check for that amount, and we deposit it into the equipment fund. It's really a reimbursement for telephone expenses from the operating fund. So from a good accounting basis, it should be a credit in the operating budget.
Because that's where we pay it out of. We don't pay it out of our equipment fund. So this is a change, Peter, and probably, I'm glad you asked, because probably we'll get that question from jurisdictions that will look there and say, what's that? No. They're not going to complain about why is it cheaper, but they will want to know. The flip side of that is that next line, the software licenses and maintenance. Some of those things had been paid out of the equipment fund, and we're starting to move them into the operational fund.
Actually, that's entirely Sierra. The software.
That's the actuals for the cost of Sierra. Yes. Our integrated library system, the contract is coming up, and we're re-upping it with them, and it's going up in costs. That's entirely that cost. Yeah.
But although if I remember the details that you and Kayla do, there's also a reduction in some other software costs because
yes. It's very expensive, but it runs our online catalog, our patient registration database. So, when you come into the library and you see staff working on a computer, that's what you wouldn't have library without it.
And where is it? What line is that?
That's the software licenses and maintenance.
Oh, right.
Should maybe rename that.
We could just call that integrated library system or something. That's the only charge that comes out of that one.
That particular one, all the other software is
That makes sense to me. So Jerry is proposing that we rename that to give it a little more clarity on what it is, so people don't make the same mistake I did.
Oh, excuse me, I didn't hear what he was saying about renaming.
Yeah, that one, the line is software licenses and maintenance, but it's really just the cost for JMRL's integrated library system. So it's one software package there.
Okay.
It's like a whole bunch of different softwares. So we could change the wording in there to make it more clear that it's for that one thing.
Okay.
Okay, I mentioned earlier that the state aid funding, we take out $25,000 a year to pay for the materials that they use, the supplies. So this is where that gets budgeted for, basically. It's going to come out of state aid, and it goes for all the supplies that our technical services division uses to process materials. Next up, the Louisa County Library. So looking at a 4.7% increase in salaries and benefits and level operating expenses. Keep in mind that each of these, that salaries and benefits number will go up a little bit once we get that medical cost for sure. Right. So a little bit more than this. These are the local costs at the Louisa County Library. So Brandy, this is the one that you and I will go to administration and talk about. Monticello Avenue is the lab at the Central Library that's split between Charlottesville and Albemarle. So there are no operational costs there. They would be included under the Central Library. Nelson County, no operational changes, just the salary increase. It's one of the larger ones because most of the staff there has been there for a long period. It's nice.
So their retirement's up.
Yes, because they had no employees that were on the DB plan, the defined benefit plan, which got that adjustment the other day. All of their employees are on the defined contribution plan. So it's all, theirs is all static. All those numbers are 7%.
Yeah.
Except for the health insurance, which we don't know for sure yet. Great question. Northside Library. Looking at a slight increase in salaries and benefits and a slight decrease in operational costs because Jerry is optimistically thinking that the rent is going to go down.
I think it was actually that fiscal 24 was estimated too high before we have the actual numbers. We have the budget, so
yeah,
sort of a correction as
we work on the budget now. They're guessing what the consumer index is going to be in the spring, and they guessed high. We get those numbers from Albemarle County. Okay, we'll talk more about Northside when we talk about the other potential positions. Council branch, increase in salaries and benefits, slight decrease in operational costs. $30. Here, Ann, was your question about where does technical services get accounted for? Does it have its own branch department? Here's where the costs are for that. Yeah. Excuse me. So this is like Taylor's job, the IT department, Meredith's job, half of Sierra's job, and then the catalogers and processors and the folks that handle all the material there.
That's mostly at Central.
I mean, it's housed at Central. Mm-hmm. In fact, I would entirely housed at the Central Library. Okay, slight technical difficulties, but we are back. And let's see if we can pick up where we left off. Thank everyone for their patience. Peter wants to start at the beginning. I think we were somewhere in the technical services. Yeah, the T. Page 14. Thank you so much, Lindsay. Yes, so we were discussing technical services, and we were talking about, Anne was asking where they were located, the staff, and they're all at the central library. Okay. And then the next line is technical services state. So this is the books line. This is the amount of state aid that's been carved out for books. So it's the entirety minus that 25,000 to do supplies. I believe that's the last page. So any questions about that draft, which is basically our best guesses for what the costs are going to be for operational costs, for personnel, using the suggestions and recommendations of the personnel committee, with the big caveat that we're still waiting for that medical insurance information to come in, and then that might not come until we're done with the actual full board voting.
So we need to vote on that. The board votes on this,
Yes.
and then we present it
Yes.
to each locale.
Yes, I will send it. So if
This
the
is what
board,
we need.
if the board votes on it on November 27th, we will post it to our website and call it the proposed budget. And then I will send a copy of it to the administrative teams in each jurisdiction, and I will write them a narrative about what their local costs are. Basically looking at that grid sheet, saying, here's what here's what JMRL is asking for, here's the increase over last year, and here's the explanation for that increase. Here are the things that we're asking for, and the reason that it's more or less or whatever it might be. And then I will set up meetings mostly in January, but December, January, to sit down with each jurisdiction, and it'll be one board member, sometimes two in Charlottesville and Albemarle, but no more than that, small groups basically, meeting with staff and sometimes elected officials to go over and review this process with them, review our requests, and talk to them about what their needs are. From there, it will be board members potentially going to elected officials meetings to advocate, or coming to their budget sessions where they ask us to come. JMRL, would you come and talk to the full Louisa County Board of Supervisors? And we would go up and explain what the needs are and explain, here's what the library's done this year, here's what we're looking to do next year, here's what the costs are. So it's a process really that goes until the end of June, because every jurisdiction has a different budget timeline. Some of them are as early as March. The last
cities
one, the city's pretty early. Albemarle County's fairly early. Louisa's fairly early. Green and Nelson are. Alita or Tony, any questions?
No, I don't think so. It's the beginning of the long slog. Of course, for Jerry, it's probably the middle of the long slog. But
Jerry's planning a vacation. I did want to talk about the other attachment that I gave you, if I can bring that up, which is these are requests that came from JMRL managers to the personnel committee that the personnel committee did not recommend for inclusion. They didn't say, yes, these should be in the budget for next year. The only two things that they recommended for inclusion were that upgrade and increase in hours to a position in Green, and then some additional substitute hours in Louisa County, which were that was a very small amount, Brandy. I'll get the actual number for you, but it was just hours for some employees to work. Like substitute teaching, same idea, basically. There were a few that didn't even make this list that just can't happen this year. There were some requests from our bookmobile and outreach services. We're limited now by only having one vehicle there. So over time, we're going to need to talk about adding more vehicles and how to fund that. So to Alita's question at the very beginning of this meeting about how bookmobile was described there, I think ideally you would have a scenario in which the bookmobile was part of the regional costs and split that way and serving all 5 jurisdictions. But it is called out separately in the regional agreement to say bookmobile and extension services are per agreement between the jurisdiction and JMRL, not part of that regional agreement. So we removed the bookmobile ones for now. There were 4 things left here, 3 requests from Northside and 1 request from the IT services there. These are the priorities that the personnel committee placed on them. They felt that very difficult. It's like choosing favorite children, basically. These are all important and all could be used. But a new position at Northside in circulation. The main reasoning there was that there was some support last year for a substitute position in children's at Northside. So, that got a little bit of attention last year, but not this year. And then the second one is, I'm sorry, yeah, that circulation support position, part-time was the first request. And I broke down here what the cost would be per each jurisdiction in total. This is a total $23,000 request for that part-time position. And then the children's specialist position was the second most important here. And I know both these departments could use the bodies and could use the support. The third most important was additional hours for our current position at the reference desk here. So Northside is unique in that there are really, with the drive up area, there are 4 service desks that need to be occupied. It's open 5. So the circulation desk, reference desk, children's desk, young adult services desk, and the drive up. So they need enough bodies to keep this operation running for the amount of hours it is. So I support this, but we are already asking for around, what was the total of an increase? $369,000 extra dollars, and I expect that to go up somewhere around $50,000. I think it's difficult sometimes to ask jurisdictions for new positions because they are competing not just internally amongst the library, but they're competing with other jurisdictional needs. So if the library asks Albemarle County for a new position, they're probably also being asked by the fire department, by their own IT, by the school systems, like all the other departments that they fund. So usually that the new positions, we have to really show a need for it. So we've got good data on what the needs are, but we also need to tie it to new services. So another thing that the personnel committee looked at was Sunday hours at the Northside Library, which would require a lot more personnel, would require a big ask of Albemarle County. The direction that the board has given so far in discussions about the budget has been to prioritize staff compensation because we know that we have fallen far behind. We've seen our jurisdictional partners able to give raises in the 5 to 10% range for the last 2 to 3 to 4 years. JMRL's increase has been 2% a year over time. My priority has been to address that by providing better raises for staff this year and continue that work on a new comp plan rather than to add on new services, which means new employees, which we would also then need to bring up to a new salary scale. So these were not recommended. I'm not currently recommending them to the budget committee, but they're being presented to you in case you look at this budget and say, it looks like there's room to add some of these things.
What does a circulation support position do?
Work in the circulation department. And the problem there is staffing on the Friday-Saturday split. You either work Friday or Saturday each week. And it's a trade, you know, you rotate in and out. And right now on Fridays there are only 4 people. So that means if somebody's sick or on vacation or, you know, whatever, attending a conference, she's really, and and you service the 2 windows. So when you work in the circ department, you actually have those assignments. And we service the drive-up window all day until half an hour closing. I also like to point out, the drive-up window checks out more books than all the small branches do. That's how busy it is. Busier than
Incredibly popular service.
In Scottsville, Bookmobile. So it's a busy place to work. Anyway, so that's why Latasha asked for that.
Yeah.
Does population growth data come into play at all, or is it more just about how people are using different brands?
I think we would make that argument in talking with our jurisdictional partners. You know, we would talk about anticipated needs. You know, we're expecting because of seeing population grow. We certainly have had this. Like when we talk to Louisa, we know that there's so much population in the state. So that helped to bring that bookmobile service out there. So it's one of the bits of data that would help to make that case.
Right. I would imagine this area of Charlottesville has been growing faster lately. Is that?
There's in Albemarle County, so we're in Albemarle County right now, not in the city of Charlottesville. There has been steady growth here. They have pushed a lot of growth in the county and into Crozet. That has been their designated growth area. You know, and we've seen a lot along the southern urban ring as well. So I don't have numbers off the top of my head. I assume that there has been growth here. I don't know if it's outpacing growth in other areas of the The final request there was for a part-time web content specialist position. So this would be somebody who would kind of work between our digital services coordinator and our PR specialist to help generate stuff that goes onto the website, basically. To develop the content that we need and then helping to curate. It's almost a full-time job just curating the programming that JMRL produces. That has to come through and be able to, which I also support. That's a regional cost, and it would require payment from all 5 jurisdictions split. Those numbers are split based on those circulation figures from the first page.
Are these requested positions that have come up year after year?
At least the first 2 from Northside were up last year as well. I'm anticipating that eventually this will be not just a nice to have, but a need here, especially if we're talking about adding more hours. We couldn't do it with the current staffing levels that we have. So presenting these as discussed by the personnel committee, their feeling was if the budget committee said, yes, if there was a hole to be filled, this is the way in which they should be, basically. But my impression of the budget is that we do not have a hole to fill for next year. Any discussion of that? Anybody feel strongly? Please, Lindsay.
I know the staff is very supportive of David's plan to increase salaries. So even though we would like these positions, they do also the people in those departments understand that higher salaries are really important to attracting and keeping staff members. We've had a lot of turnover, although some of it's been good. Some of it's been a lot of internal promotions, but it's everybody's very supportive of David's plan. So,
what would you say are the risks of adding these?
I think ultimately the risk is of asking for more than our partners think is reasonable. So in this case, I believe, politically speaking, I believe that our partners would look at some of these and say, what are we getting in exchange for that? What new services are being offered? What new hours? What new programs? Things like that. And we could likely come up with the things that we would be able to do because somebody would be freed up. But specifically for the circulation support team, their job is to run the circulation department, to check materials in and out, to help patrons, to process materials, things like that. It's mostly a volume thing. It's keeping up with the demand that we have on them now. So Albemarle, and largely this would be Albemarle cost, there's a small Charlottesville cost here, but anyone using this position. Albemarle, I think, would understand the argument more that, okay, well, it's for capacity, it's for current capacity to keep up with it. But I know that they also have an interest in having hours and services here. And as I said, my concern is adding positions that then we need to bring are going to be adding to the weight of what's behind on salary. So I don't being told no, but that's not a problem. We get told no. When they're asking for funding, we're used to explaining how the library works. I think that in my mind, these are probably positions that are tied to more hours.
Sorry. I guess I can't cry at meetings, can I?
I am in support of and would like to see at some point, but we need to have the full support of our jurisdictional partners to bring a lot of resources to that. Yeah. It's not as simple as just, a few hours on Sunday. We need a lot of resources. Did you have a question, Brandon?
Yeah, number 4, the web content specialist. Yes. Is that a brand new position? Do we already have somebody that we pay that does this?
The request is for a brand new position, but currently the duties are part of the digital services coordinator, and it's split between her and the collections and technology manager. Kayla does some of this work as well now.
So by creating the new position, while obviously that would be a benefit, what would they be doing in those that are doing already, Kayla?
Yeah, I think it would free them up to work on improvements to the webpage and services there. So they sent me a very thorough justification included here of the things that they would be able to do, but
I'm just looking because I look at that one, and that actually goes with it benefits regionally as opposed to just one library. No offense to anybody, but
Yeah, that would be a
so,
regional
to
cost.
me personally, I would think that would be a nice priority if we're looking at a position on a new person.
Could you repeat that again?
Go ahead, Alita.
I didn't hear what you were saying about the priority.
I would think personally that having a web content person would be, if we were to look at adding a position, would be a benefit to the whole library system.
Okay.
Instead of just Northside, Charlottesville, Albemarle benefit.
So,
Yeah, I can see that.
Okay.
Anybody? This committee doesn't have any voting binding power. We're just making a recommendation, basically. Making a recommendation to the full board there. Anybody strongly feeling that one or more of these should be included in the budget that we send to the full board?
I'm just curious about kind of like strategy and over time. Is now a better or worse than normal time to ask for a little extra than maybe next year will be?
Who knows what next year will bring, right? It kind of depends on the scenarios that each jurisdiction is facing. So what their needs are going to be. Like, for instance, I know that Charlottesville is looking at some major costs for next year. So they're probably going to be not looking to add a bunch of costs for current services because they're looking at collective bargaining coming online. They've got a bunch of other initiatives and things like that. I'll say that when I met with the 5 jurisdictions, the meeting every year is a discussion. It happens before October 15th. I reported on it to the full board when we met earlier, and usually they look at what their prognostications are for the next year. Last year it was very doom and gloom. Because if you remember like September, October, everybody thought we were headed for a recession nationally, and they were acting accordingly. They were starting to kind of marshal in and set expectations, and were thinking about kind of not having any new services. It has opened up a bit this year. They didn't see that downturn in the overall economy, but there's still some skittishness on all 5, on every Virginia county or city.
But property values are up, right? So
property values are up.
Taxes
right?
should be up.
The tax rates are up. So I'm not hearing anybody saying anything here. We will put a pin in these for now. Hold on to them. We can certainly, what we can do is start talking about these needs with our jurisdictional partners. I mentioned some last year, but especially when we sit down with Albemarle County, Peter, and talk to them about needs, we can get Lindsay to provide us with some data about usage here and growth and how many person hours we have versus how many open hours and things like that. So we can kind of start laying some groundwork for, hey, we're going to need, for expansion in the future, we're going to need these things moving forward.
This library is not open at all on Sundays.
No. We were years, before we were in this building, when we were in the other building, we were open on Sundays for about 10 years, but the recession killed it.
I don't think any of the libraries are open on Sunday right now, are they?
Central. Yes. Central Library is open.
It's the one that's down in the mall.
Yeah.
It was for several years.
It was for a few years. Yep.
Sunday hours, yes. It was very nice.
Yeah.
I think
having a homeschooled child at that time.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's great for kids, for school-age kids to have.
We're sorting through the feedback surveys from the 5-year plan group too, and it comes up with some frequency in every jurisdiction. People would like to see more open hours. They want earlier hours. They want later hours. They want Sunday hours. People want to be able to come to the library. They want it open.
Yeah.
Want to provide that.
It closes at 5, and it's like 7 o'clock. I got a book to drop, which I can still drop it, but it's like, oh, I need to go pick up a book. And now I had a job that was conventional, being able to go and work. And
have you used the hold locker yet?
I have not.
We're gonna make that our goal.
I have to finish reading the books I have checked out.
Okay, so Alita, I think the last task that we have, I'm sorry we're over a little bit because of the technical difficulties, but is to to make a recommendation for the library board, because what we would like to do, the library board meets on the 27th, is to send out this document that you all have been reviewing basically now, so that they have a few weeks to get familiar with it, so that there's a chance for a vote on November 27th. Is there consensus to submit it as is with a little caveat about the medical change that's going to come?
I mean, do we have to move to
No,
that?
I'm looking for I'm looking for nobody to object strenuously, basically.
I think we should
Okay.
move it forward.
Yeah, Alita?
Well, say that again. You to submit as a recommendation as is with the caveat that.
Basically, does the budget committee, is there a consensus to submit this to the board for them to start reviewing for a review and vote in, because we'll basically do this whole thing again for the full board meeting on November 27th.
Mm-hmm.
Be good to send them what we have now.
Yeah, I think we should send them what we have now.
Okay. Then I think we're done with the business at hand. Any other information to share? You want to gavel us out, Alita?
Okay. Do we have a proposed adjournment? Anybody?
Don't even need that committee. You can just say we're done.
Okay, well, I guess we're done then.
Thank you. Thanks for coming remotely. Thanks for everyone in person.
Thank you.
See you soon. Don't forget Gordon Avenue this month.
Okay.
Thanks for all the work on the budget.